God is not using you. God is living through you. Whatever you are, wherever you are right now is exactly where you are supposed to be. Did you hear that? Whatever you are, wherever you are, whoever you are in Christ right now is exactly what you are supposed to be. It's His job to change you if you're going to change. We do not live in transactional Christianity. We live in process Christianity. We do not live in a transaction. We live in a process. Let me say it again. This is not a transaction whereby you go to God and pay God off for favor and pay God off for blessing by doing stuff for Him. God, what would you have me do for you this week? I owe you. Sounds really holy, doesn't it? Real spiritual. But what ends up happening on the other side of that is a transaction, because here's how you'll pray next week. Lord, just want to remind you, fasted 2 days, read 40 chapters, witnessed to 5 people at work, really expecting you to come through. You go, Pastor, who would ever pray like that? All of us. Every one of us have been on our knees before and said, Lord, I've been praying more than I've ever prayed in my life. Lord, I've been giving at church. Lord, I've been doing. Why are you telling God this? You think He forgot, or are you just trying to remind yourself? Well, the reality is we need to say it out loud, because there's a transaction that's supposed to happen. I mean, why else am I doing all this? Why else did I work so hard and pray so much and read so much? If I'm not going to get something out of this, what's the point? I mean, I gave you, now you give me. So what are you going to give me? What's the transaction here? What are we trading off? And this is why grace has run into so many walls in the American church. Because at our fundamental core as Americans, we can't stand the thought of getting something we didn't pay for. In fact, we call those people the problem in our country. If you're expecting to get something you didn't put into, then you're just a leech. And what we do is we hear the message of grace in which God blesses man by no effort of man, only by faith, that God puts fruit through a branch that is only hanging there on the vine, that at many times of the year has no fruit at all. And yet God doesn't cut them off and get rid of them. He cultivates them and He moves upon them and He blesses them. And we say this can't be, because this goes against God's heart. This can't be the way it is. It goes against rational thought. But that's because we have transactional Christianity, where we have made a payment and we expect something in return. Listen to Romans chapter 4, verse number 4. Now to him who works, the wages are not counted as grace, they are counted as debt. Let me say that again. If you work, your paycheck is not a grace check. Your paycheck is a wage check. You earned it. This is transactional blessings. I get what I get from God because I worked for it, because I did my part, and I expect God's going to do His part. And Paul's preaching to the Jews who have had a hard time accepting Christ as Messiah in Romans 4. And so Paul has made the turn and is going to start describing righteousness by faith using Abraham as his example, because every one of his Jewish brethren understand Abraham as the example. And he says, how did Abraham be declared righteous? Was it because he did good things, or was it because he believed a good God? Now, every Jew knew the answer. It was simple. It's because he believed good things. In fact, if you look at Abraham's life, he's got some moral problems. He's got some issues. And so Paul says, to him who works, those wages are not counted as a grace wage or according to grace. They're counted according to debt. Verse 5, but to him who does not work, but believes on him who justifies the ungodly, his faith is counted or accounted. This is an accounting term. It's declared as done. His faith is declared to make him righteous. Just as David, verse 6, also describes the blessedness of the man to whom God imputes righteousness apart from works. And this is where God actually accounts you righteous apart from what you've done. How is this possible if not by faith? But if we had a transactional Christianity, it would not be possible, because we would need a paycheck from God based upon what we do good. And this is why we're putting 2 Chronicles 7:14 on our church signs. Because we have a transactional Christianity. If my people. Not if my son, and if my people will believe on my son. But no, if my people will do, then I will do. That's transactional. So when it's revival time, we go into a transaction with God. And we say, God, we are going to fast and pray X amount of days and believe that because of that, you're going to move. Hey, fasting and praying X amount of days is not a bad thing. And I want to make sure we clarify something maybe I left unclarified last night. Praying an hour every day, not a bad thing. Praying 5 hours every day, not a bad thing. Praying every day, all day, not a bad thing. Paul said pray without ceasing. Absolutely, great, awesome thing. But once it turns into what defines you, once it turns into a transaction whereby you believe you're going to get something for God, in that moment it needs snipped out of your life. It's in that very moment that it's become a problem, because what started good is only going to dwarf your future development because you've begun to pay God off with your performance and you expect a paycheck in return. So if you want to fast going into a meeting, fast by all means. If God leads you to do that, I don't think God will. I was being honest with you. I don't think God will. But if you believe God did, then by all means do it. Just don't base whether or not the meeting's going to be anointed on it, because you're going to be sorely disappointed. Because God doesn't owe you for your works. He's already finished the work in Jesus. He doesn't owe you a check. You show up first night of revival and go, "Well, I fasted for 3 days." He goes, "I bet you're hungry, aren't you?" Maybe after church you feel free to go eat. I don't know. You're not in a transactional covenant. You're in a process where God's living His life through you. Now, if you feel God's distant and He's way off and you feel compelled to fast, I would say the compulsion is because you've made an enemy in your mind out of a distant God that you think needs bought off with His presence, and that if you could just buy Him off right, He would show up. And you can do that all you want to do it, and you'll have peaks and valleys. You'll have moments where it strikes just right because you did the rain dance and by God it rained. And you'll go, "Let's work." How do you think this stuff starts in cultures? Rain dance long enough, what's going to happen? Cycle's going to fly around, boom, here comes a rain cloud. Must have worked. We forgot the 99 times we danced, nothing happened. Must mean you got to dance 100 times. That's how we think. Every fourth revival, I feel it. So let's, we'll have 2 or 3, and then boom, one day, there it is, slot machine God. Transaction, put it in, pull, pray. Got it. Isn't this a cheap way to live? But it's a distant way to live. But in the process, Romans 12, it's not transaction, it's process. It's understanding that this is a process by which fruit production comes out. Romans 12:1, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. I'm reading from the New King James. That last reasonable is terrible out of the Greek. It shouldn't be reasonable. It should be rational. That's the Greek word. That you should present your bodies to God. This is your rational service. Let me ask you, why is it rational to present your bodies as a living sacrifice to God? It's rational because He already lives in you. It's rational that if God lives in you, then you belong to Him and He belongs to you. You're not transacting